Welcome back. You're watching Global Today, and we want now to concentrate on our discussion here, but I'll be remiss if I also don't just read out an apology from Peter Kagwanja. Professor Peter Kagwanja was meant to be here, but he says, in Muranga, it got too late, he says, so he cannot really make it this morning, but we continue the conversation nonetheless. Now, South African President Cyril Ramaphosa has blamed NATO for the war in Ukraine and said he will resist calls to condemn Russia in comments that cast doubt over whether he will be accepted by Ukraine or the West as a mediator. According to Ramaphosa, the war could have been avoided if NATO had heeded the warnings from amongst its own leaders and officials over the years that its eastward expansion will lead to greater, not less, instability in the region. But he added that South Africa cannot condone the use of force in violation of international law, an apparent reference to Russia's February 24th invasion of Ukraine. Ramaphosa also revealed that Putin had assured him personally that negotiations were making progress. The South African leader said he had not yet talked with Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky, but that he wanted to. President Vladimir Putin has characterized Russia's actions as a special operation to disarm and denazify Ukraine and counter what he calls NATO aggression. Listen in.
War could have been avoided if NATO had heeded the warnings from amongst its own leaders and officials over the years that its eastward expansion would lead to greater, not less.
All right, so where does this put Africa? Because Africa has been mealy-mouthed about Russia-Ukraine war for the longest time. We just heard from, of course, our own here, Ambassador Kimani, during the United Nations Security Council, roundly condemning what is happening, or roundly condemning Russia with the Ukrainian war, as it were. But voices of concern are arising on where is the stand of Africa, and here now is Ramaphosa. I just want to hear from our panelists, beginning with you, Dr. Kanenje. Listening to Ramaphosa and what he says, does it really speak? Of course, he's not speaking for the entire Africa, but this is the first voice that we're hearing from a presidential figure from Africa by the end of the day.
Dibal, what Ramaphosa in South Africa, partly represents, I think, a sense in the global south. And from our round table on Monday, it was very clear that there's a sense in the global south a little bit different from how people view it from the north. And I think one thing he's alluding to is even just going back to the statement that our ambassador made, which was taken just in one way in terms about condemning, but he also spoke to the emergency of unilateralism that has actually been going on in recent years. And much of the global south is very acutely aware of the double standards, actually, that are being practiced by our Western partners. And unless they seek to actually see it also from the point of view of the global south, it's going to be challenging. Now, of course, we understand that South Africa is part of the BRICS, with China and Russia and India, trying perhaps to provide an alternative world order. But even part of the formation of the BRICS is the recognition that the global south was becoming increasingly marginal, especially in global affairs, and that the new world order that was expected with the collapse of the Soviet Union has been characterized largely by a lot of interventionism and unilateralism. And, Africans look at their own experience in Libya, for instance, and they wonder what kind of consensus was there internationally and in terms of legality that actually had to necessitate or require the destruction of the state, as well as other parts in the world. And so, merging that, those sentiments with what was clear that came out from our round table was actually, we had representation from Europe, from Russia, even from Ukraine, from the United States, and some leading African scholars in this country. And the sentiment is there is I think a disconnect between the way the Global South looks at the world order and the way the North looks at the world order. And increasingly, a number of leading African countries, while they've said they don't condone Russia's activities in Ukraine because of the violation of territorial integrity and sovereignty, a number of them have also not condemned necessarily those actions. And I think as the conflict unfolds and with the kind of response that we have witnessed, there is a chance that we are going to have a rather new world order that is going to be a lot more different from what we have had. And I think our Western partners also need to pay attention to this, because what this is also likely to do is likely to push a number of the Global South countries further into the armpit of China, for instance. And for obvious reasons, because they may be seen perhaps a little bit more fairer and perhaps less hypocritical, even though we understand that in democracy and liberal ideologies are not exactly some of the things they espouse.
Hashi, South Africa has been approached to play a mediation role. Ramaphosa tweeted last week. If he's been approached to play a mediator role, or South Africa has been actually chosen to actually play that particular role, and then he comes on the floor of the House, he says he's condemning, NATO for what is happening in Russia. Has he not really taken a stand, even before he goes for those mediations and talks? At the end of the day, you've come with your own opinion. You come with your own, of course, stand as far as the war is concerned. So how do you become, an arbiter?
Western liberalism is perplexed, and I must say it's hubris, because their understanding of the African mind or the African sense and sensibility about the war in Ukraine is based on this same kind of unilateralism that they practice in international relations. Unilateralism does not come only from a political economy, but it also comes from a cultural view of the world. I mean, who are these Africans to tell us why are we wrong here, why we are right? It is a hubris that is fused into the myth of Western civilization, that they are the leading force in global history, and that their view of the world is pertinent, and everybody else's is not at the civilizational scale. And part of this discourse and narrative about is this whole idea about the clash of civilizations. Now, when you think that the world is based on the clash of civilizations, and then inside your own civilization of white, blue-eyed, blonde people, there is a clash. There is a kind of sclerosis that emerges out of that. And what's that sclerosis? It is this idea, Debal, that in Africa, the European mind believes that we are a chieftaincy, that Africans really don't believe in democracy. They really don't believe in the rule of law. They like the big man dictator who has several wives, has got a big farm, looks after cows, and essentially caricatures the African personality into a dwarf when it comes to thinking about civilizations. And I really want to say that I tweeted to Mr. Ramaphosa. He's a friend. He helped advise us here in Kenya on many issues. I tweeted and I said that Africa needed a response. And Mr. Saleh and Mr. Ramaphosa were quick to say that the civilian population in Ukraine is innocent. Every African feels terrible about the invasion of Ukraine. There's no question about that. Every sense of our human decency calls it out. We oppose it. We feel that these people are being put as a sandwich in the affairs of the global security system. However, there are three things that characterizes the African personality on this issue. First and foremost is the Cold War. And you remember South Africa, under apartheid, the United States dragged its feet. Hadn't it been for the African American population in the United States, it would have taken more time for the sanctions to hit. The second thing is Angola.
Yes.
Angola would never have been free unless Soviet Cuba forces came and pushed South African racist apartheid regime back. They were defeated. That led to the independence of Namibia and ultimately to the independence of South Africa. Therefore, this memory of the contribution of the Soviet Union to the liberation of Africa, whatever their intent was, is something that is at front and center in every African mind. And the fact of the matter is, we can have a different idea about what is going on without, having this something called whataboutism or equivocating on the right of Ukrainian lives to live. We don't want this conflict, but we understand where the conflict comes from, and we see where it comes from. And Mr. Ramaphosa's sense largely speaks to what Africa thinks about this war.
All right, Professor Nwami Damba. So South Africa is joining India, joining China, and of course in the United Nations Security Council vote, against condemning this particular war. It seems they're flinching back on earlier, saying that Russia should withdraw. So is Ramaphosa also speaking from both sides of the mouth? And Waswahili wanasema pia mwambia ngoma huvutia kwake, right? So we have, as Dr. Kanenje is saying, this part of the BRICS. They have interest because of the BRICS as well at the end of the day. Could that also be sort of acting as a conduit and a conveyor belt to the interest of South Africa within this particular war, so you're siding with Russia?
Dubal, allow me to join my colleagues to make several points here. There was no question that from the time Reagan asked Gorbachev to tear down the wall, and jointly together with Gorbachev, and looking at his writing and his beliefs, which are available to all the public, Gorbachev really believed there was a lost opportunity to create a united, we could call it United States of Europe, where Russia was part and parcel, where there was opportunity to reduce this lethal, deadly weapon system that has developed with both sides, United States, Europe, and also Russia. That opportunity was lost, and now five succeeding presidents of United States never made a point to say control NATO from moving eastward and to change the nature of NATO to something else where Russia was accepted and become part of and parcel of a unity that is conducive and productive for the future world. Now we are where we are at the bar. Several points I want to make. One is that the war in Russia-Ukraine is a stalemate. Ukraine was well-trained, well-equipped, and ready to fight to the last man in Ukraine to protect their country. So Russia is not going to easily walk over Ukraine. Now, Russia, listening to Christian Ramaphosa and the chief spokesperson of Russia, Russia is going to engage in a deadly development, which is using this hypersonic weapon system, which are basically set for a strategic weapon system. Right. So they will be much more destructive. And they start talking about Dubal. They start talking about nuclear.
Right.
That is
I'm sorry to butt in, Professor. Yes, I know the weaponization, we can discuss about that, but I have been very pointed regarding what Ramaphosa is saying. And China, we have China, we have as well China and India now, and Ramaphosa joining around condemning this as well. Just your thoughts on that briefly.
Dubal,
yes.
Dubal, Africa cannot stand on the side. This war is wrong. Ambassador Martin stated exactly what Africa need to say. Russia should never have gone into this war. And nobody, if you take the principle of the United Nations, and the nation state. Russia has invaded Ukraine, and therefore that has to be condemned. And then secondly, Dubar, we now have to move to a solution. A solution, if Ramaphosa can be helpful, the India can be helpful, Israel can be helpful, Turkey can be helpful. They need to talk to Putin. There is need for a ceasefire right now. And then that will then move to a second stage where diplomacy takes place and where you talk about potential neutrality in the future of Ukraine, not joining either Russia or joining what we call NATO, and then now moving to a clear solution on what needs to be done there, and then moving further, Dubal, to a place where Africa-Russia relationship can be productive. But there is absolutely, from where I'm coming from, that there is not much Africa can gain from Russia right now by selling weapons of destruction and then beginning to behave like North Korea. North Korea economy is, Kenya economy is twice the size of North Korea. Yet they shoot these missiles every other month, and the president is laughing when you do that. Now, we don't need that in Africa, and I don't think, Debal, that Sudan is going to benefit better than Kenya and the rest of the country.
But you know, the most outstanding thing that you're saying, we cannot really benefit from Russia as a continent, and we have 16 countries, African countries, which have implicitly support, you know, Russia by not really voting on the UN Security Council at the end of the day, including Eritrea, which is not really part of course, of the UN Security Council, but also they have sided with Russia on this. We know of the mercenaries in Central Africa. We know the resources companies in this Africa. This is just going to show you that there's a swath of Russian invasion here in Africa, a swath of China invasion here in Africa, is actually a new world order that is being, you know, taken topsy-turvy, as it were, at the end of the day. So do you think what you're saying really holds water at the end of the day? Just think about it.
Let's talk facts. The U.S. economy last year was $25 trillion. China economy last year was $14 trillion. Russia economy was $2 trillion, which is less than the state of Texas and equivalent to Brazil. Russia has hypersonic weapon system and other deadly weapon system. But when you look at the history, look at South Korea and North Korea. South Korea economy is one of the largest in the world. North Korea economy is the least. And so the point is, by selling weapons of destruction where we will kill each other in Africa, instead of having an economy that's vibrant, that's bringing up the people, increasing technology, helping with education. Russia is not going to do that. The Russia, the past, that partner with Africa for freedom, independence, is gone. We have oligarchy who own everything and control everything, and is immune from the kind of Russia that Africa will expect. So, in my opinion, Kenya needs to take a very strong stand like they have with Ghana to stick and stay with the West and develop this country toward the place where Kenya needs to be self-sufficient and not be part of the Ramaphosa bandwagon.
All right, Peter Biarajak, South Africa has expressed, of course, solidarity on international law, and also this seemed to have taken aback many of the legislators in the House where he was speaking. I can just quote one, John Steenhuisen, who is the leader of the Democratic Alliance, who said, to the astonishment of the world, the same ANC that once relied on global solidarity in its fight against oppression has now openly sided with oppressor, right? I said this on the debate in the war that South Africa is taking a stand on right now. Do you hold with what Professor Noah Midamba is saying in the first place? And if we have 16 countries in this continent implicitly supporting the Russians, where are we headed? What does it tell you?
Well, first of all, yes, I completely agree with Professor Noah Midamba. His analysis is right on spot. Let me also first add by saying that Ramaphosa is not speaking for the African continent, nor is he speaking for the global south. We remember just a few weeks ago when the resolution condemning Russia was brought to the General Assembly of the United Nations. Of African countries, the majority of the countries voted to condemn Russia. 28 countries from Africa voted to condemn Russia. 17 countries abstained, of which South Africa was one of them, and one country voted in support of Russia. And as you correctly pointed out, that was Eritrea, and six countries did not vote for whatever reason. So it's important to first state that Ramaphosa is speaking for himself and his country. I have noticed on social media there is a lot of support from some of the parties in South Africa for Russia. And it may be, as Hashi put it before, because of the memories of the Soviet Union and the support that the Soviet Union provided. There is no doubt that Soviet Union played a critical role in the end of colonialism in Africa and in independence processes for many of African countries. Even South Sudan, when we started the war first in 1983, the first ally that supported us was the communist Ethiopia, which of course was a client state of the Soviet Union at the time. But of course, the Russia we have today, as I keep saying here every single Wednesday, is not the same Soviet Union. The Russia we have now, and it's important people remember this, Soviet Union also included Ukraine, right? It was not Russia. Ukraine was part of the Soviet Union. So if people are having these feelings of solidarity because of the support of the Soviet Union, that should also extend to Ukraine, because Ukraine was part and parcel of that support that Soviet Union rendered to African countries. But as Noah Midamba mentioned correctly, Russian economy is very small compared to the weight that Russia wants to be given to it when it comes to international affairs. It's a country that has an economy half of that of California, is an economy that is not diversified, entirely dependent on natural resources, particularly on petroleum and natural gas, which accounts for 60% of the GDP. And now is a country that is being sanctioned, where the currency is completely destroyed, where the long-term savings are gone, and is a country now where free speech is criminalized and is becoming a totalitarian state where people have no rights whatsoever. So it's completely shocking that a businessman like Ramaphosa, because Ramaphosa is an oligarch in South Africa, is one of the African billionaires. He knows very well how to make money and what is required, the kind of environment that is required for business to prosper, to come and say that he has been invited. He also said that he has not spoken with the president of Ukraine. So who invited him to come and be a mediator here? It seems like it's the Russian that invited him, and then he on his own put on this hat of being a mediator, and he want to come and mediate singing Russian talking points. There is only one issue here, and that is the issue, which country has forces on which country? And is Russia forces that have crossed into Ukraine, is Russia that is bombing Ukraine, and Ukraine is a sovereign nation. The rest of the issues don't matter, because at the end of the day, a sovereign nation is free to choose its own destiny. It doesn't matter what it decides to do, as long as it does not violate anything to do with another country. Ukraine wanted to join NATO. That's it. They wanted to join European Union. That's it. And by the way, the first time Ukraine applied to join NATO was 2008. 2008. And now it's 2022, and Russia is going to war to start war with Ukraine, to start a war because it doesn't want Ukraine to join NATO, a membership that was applied 14 years ago. Just absurd.
All right, let me just come to Dr. Kanenje on this as well. We know that South Africa has no economic or military interest in Russia, as it were. So this particular approach from Ramaphosa, is it just a real political approach? What's really informing him? As we have Dr. Peter Berajaka also commenting that, yes, this is his own interest. He's not speaking on behalf of Africa at the end of the day.
Yeah, actually, thanks a lot, for the contribution of my colleague. One of the things that I think we need to look at, and for those of us who study diplomacy, we look at actions, not words. And when you look at actions, especially of the Global South, is much of the Global South has refused, literally, to join the sanctions movement in terms of imposing sanctions against Russia. Leading countries, Indonesia, Brazil, in fact, the Indonesian Foreign Affairs Minister said we're not going to join sanctions blindly. The Argentinian Foreign Minister said the other day that they don't think there is a mechanism to be able to find a resolution. And much of Latin America, Asia, and actually Africa, they have refused categorically to join the sanctions, and they're kind of sitting on the edges. Now, that is more telling as opposed to just words of support or words of condemnation. Now, having said that, I firmly believe, even just based on the roundtable we did, and we didn't go there really with any predispositions of how things were going to take shape. But there is an underlying feeling of the Global South with regard to what I say, double standards when it comes to international law, international racism, that where, for instance, whenever those cases affect Africans, people of color, the response is never the same, whether it's to do with sanctions or actually just to do with humanitarian help. Here we have seen, in this case, Europeans being pretty much offered money to host Ukrainian refugees. But then when it comes to Africans or Arabs or Asians, we're trying to work out a way in which how can we prevent them from coming to our countries. And this feeling, and I want to encourage all our colleagues to actually read, just follow what is happening, especially in reading dailies, whether it's in Latin America, in Asia or Africa, and see how they're covering and discussing that conflict. Look at the real discussions that is happening within academia or research institutions in those countries. You're going to realize the underlying sense is that this is not a conflict they want to be part of, and they think there's double standard in international law and international relations, and perhaps that they need to be a different system. Now, that does not mean they support the Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Absolutely not. But the underlying feeling, even within the continent, and if we are actually to be honest with ourselves and just try to take time, you're going to realize that there is a sense of pretty much global apartheid that really, in which Africans, people of color, are never treated as, equally. And when it comes to the history of the conflict itself, there is a sense of injustice, even though there is a bigger injustice, because one injustice cannot be used to justify another injustice like what is happening right now. But for us to actually deny or even just say that perhaps Ramaphosa is speaking for himself, I think it may be a little bit of a misnomer. Because he's actually speaking for a lot of Africans.
For a lot of Africans.
Yes. And I don't mean to disagree with my brother because, of course, he's representing South Africa, and South Africa has a unique history with apartheid, and in which, of course, the Soviet bloc used to be more supportive. In fact, the brother to Fidel Castro is the one who was physically heading the military actually in Angola to beat back the apartheid South Africa military. And so, of course, you have that history also meshed into it, but much of the Global South, in terms of actions, has actually refused to join the sanctions, because that would have been more meaningful with regard to putting meaning to their words as opposed to just expressing words of condemnation.
So there's a usable past that Putin also is really leveraging on, as you say, their support for the anti-apartheid. And so there's also that nostalgic feeling from the South Africans who now we have Ramaphosa as the epitome and the figure of the Southern African region, speaking for many as well. So
I find myself agreeing with my colleague, Dr. Pierre Ajak, and the reason I agree with him is the reason of history. And I believe that Russia invasion of Ukraine under the normal statutes of international law is of course illegal. But the CIA dragged the great late Colin Powell to the United Nations Security Council. The American government cheated its own Secretary of State. They told him to read a statement in the Security Council, and he brought out something called centrifuges and said Iraq had centrifuges and that they were developing nuclear weapons of mass destruction, and the world had to follow the lead of the United States. in what was subsequently called the shock and awe bombing of probably the most advanced Arab state in the Middle East. 2 million people died. The entire Middle East is a mess. It has led to Syria and to Libya. Okay? This is the kind of moral equivocation that I find really toxic. That when it came to Iraq, when it came to what happened to those people, it was about freedom. It was about the MAC world against the jihad. And when it came to Ukraine, you could see the West's media. It's actually quite gagging sometimes, you know, how the use of little children and the suffering of the Ukrainian people is used to postulate in the media. You could see The Economist, the spokesperson of neoliberal disciplinary world order, saying, is China and Putin the alternative world order? So, Deval, what we are condemning is not condemning or being in solidarity with Russia invasion of Ukraine. What we're saying is that when the United States does the same thing, the international response is different from what is happening now. So we're just calling, and I agree with Mr. Ajak, that we're just calling for a uniform criticism of these kinds of things in the international order today. But you can't have one standard for Iraq. You can't have one standard for Libya. You can't have one standard for Syria and have a completely different standard for Ukraine. That's the issue that we're just putting on the table. And that is ideological, that is about material interest, and that is about what the global order is going to become, and that's what people are fighting over. And I can tell you the West is going to walk away from Ukraine because Mr. Putin may park a couple of nuclear weapons in London, and nobody is going to stand up for Ukraine after, and hypocritically pushing them to a certain direction. And Mr. Zelensky himself has said, I am going to negotiate with Mr. Putin in Jerusalem. He said, the city of peace. And I predicted that last time I was here.
You're a prophet.
I predicted it.
Yes, yes.
And it happened. And I can tell you that we're at a turning point. And Mr. Zelensky has noticed that his Western friends have left him. And he's going to go and talk to Mr. Putin. And the arrangements are going to be completely different come next week. I say here again.
So what is the rhyme or reason for President Biden also going to Brussels, meeting the European countries, and people were wondering, will he have a seating also with the Ukrainian president? Will he go to the Wharton area, as it were? Professor?
There are several things I want our colleagues, also the audience, to understand. At this point, it is very, very important for United States and Europe to speak with one voice because we have a potential serious catastrophe for the entire world, such that we don't know who is going to be left if Putin starts using nuclear war. We don't know. But let me tell you the development, which I'm even more concerned about. I'm concerned about the rise of what we call Germanic race in Europe, which again going to look at the First World War, Second World War. I'm really concerned about Japan, and Japan using highly sophisticated technology to develop and improve on American weapon system that will completely deter and challenge China. If China attempt to go the way the Russians has moved on Taiwan. And so what we are going to have is a global thermonuclear weapon, Third World War. That is the issue. And Africans who are standing on the side must understand that. That's the core point. So we have to condemn in the strongest voice possible what Russia has done. And we also have to be very clear with Europe and NATO that we don't need to be used. We don't need to be part of that, the game plan. We cannot push the world to the brink. It is time to have a ceasefire and begin talking sense on where the world needs to go.
All right. talking of the escalation and the weapons that you were alluding to earlier, there's a specter of nuclear, bombs as well. But we've seen Russia unleashing some of the highly sophisticated weapons. We can talk about the thermobarics as it were right now. We can talk about, I don't know what's the name of that weapon, but it's actually traveling 10 times faster than the speed of sound. Isn't that really consternating? And you can tell us more, Dr. Peter Biarajak, as a wind-up on that.
Well, I'm not an expert on weapon systems. I think that thing is an issue that I would gladly defer to Professor Nomi Damba. But back to the issue that we are talking about, let me state that what Hashi is saying is something that we all agree on this forum. I don't think there is anyone here that has ever defended the war that the America waged on Iraq, or what happened in regard to Libya.
Yes.
If it is the issue of Syria, both of them are to blame. In fact, it was Russian forces that razed Aleppo to the ground. And I remember that beautiful city when I visited in 2006. If it is the issue of intervention, this is something that we are all saying that that is not the right thing to be done. Even though we live here in the US, one good thing about America is that there is freedom of speech and anyone can speak his mind. Even within America here, there was a very large and vocal anti-war movement. And if you remember President Barack Obama, when he won the presidency the first time, he was running on the promise to end the war in Iraq and the war in Afghanistan. So within America, there is democracy, there is freedom of speech, and there's a system that corrects itself. That is not the case in Russia. And what we are saying with regard to the situation in Russia is that it's unleashing some very dangerous forces that Professor just mentioned. He mentioned the issue of Taiwan, and that is a real concern that everybody is watching. We are worried about what lessons that China may learn from something like this. I, as a South Sudanese, am worried about lessons that a Sudanese regime that is now moving closer and closer to the Russian orbit may do in regard to South Sudan. It wouldn't be anyhow different from what Russia has done in regard to Ukraine. And you know very well our history and the contention that we have there. So the point we are saying here, and the reason why we are condemning Russia, is that it is violating the sovereignty of another country. And it is creating a world that is much and much more dangerous. I agree with the issue of racism, 100%. There is no doubt about it. The way that the refugees in Ukraine are being treated is not the way that refugees in Syria, in fact, Poland, which has now taken in millions and millions of refugees from Ukraine, the prime minister there ran on the platform to not allow a single refugee from Middle East. You remember here Donald Trump ran on the campaign to ban Muslims from ever entering the United States. Those things should be condemned, and rightly so. But at the same time also, we are quick at condemning West when it does these discriminatory issues, but we also don't look at ourselves. It was just a few months ago that here in Kenya, the Kenyan government announced that it was going to close down the Kakuma refugee camp and is going to close down the Dadaab refugee camp. These are refugees from South Sudan, refugees from Somalia, refugees from some of the regional countries whose countries have been turned by thuggish leaders into death fields. And now we want to kick them out. Yet here we come and complain that our refugees are not treated well by the Western white people, whereas we in Africa do not treat ourselves very well. It's very difficult sometimes to travel to some African countries than it is to travel to foreign countries. So the issue, we have to also be honest with ourselves and first treat ourselves as we deserve. Treat ourselves as brothers and build ourselves, build up our people so that our people are respected. We cannot demand respect of our people from foreigners when we treat them like nothing. Look now how in South Sudan, how President Salva Kiir and Riek Machar are treating South Sudanese people. Subjected to endless war, people are being executed on the streets, people are being denied basic lives, women are raped in mass. How do they have now a moral sense to demand that their own people be treated well by others when they don't give them the right kind of treatment?
Thank you.
So these are the issues that we should always be pointing out.
Thank
but
you.
I do agree, racism is a problem, and we should always be demanding that. But in this case here, Russia has violated Ukraine's sovereignty and is contributing to creating a world that is far, far more dangerous.
All right, thank you. Now, of course, we have confluence of factors and issues that are connected with the war as well, and one of which is that suppression of the supply shocks on fertilizer. And Nigerian billionaire Aliko Dangote has opened a 3 million ton fertilizer plant at a cost of 2.5 billion shillings to target African and foreign markets, even as the war in Ukraine has driven up prices for natural gas, a key ingredient for making urea. Dangote said exports from the plant will go to Brazil, which relies heavily on Russia for imports of fertilizer. Shipments will also go to the United States, India and Mexico. Fertilizer prices have been rising at a time when planting usually picks up around the world, especially after Russia, the world's biggest exporter of fertilizer, invaded Ukraine last month. The war has also disrupted shipping. The plant, commissioned by President Muhammadu Buhari and located at the Lekki Free Zone in Lagos State, is designed to produce 3 million tons of urea per year and supply all the major markets in sub-Saharan Africa. And I think this is a good move by Dangote. You know the opportunity, so you know to seize the moment. This is seizing the moment. So you have that business acumen, looking at what is happening currently and then taking advantage, setting up a plant. Of course, here in the country, we've been crying about fertilizer. A bag of fertilizer is going for around 6,700 shillings, right? Right now, almost to 7,000. And that is, as we were talking before, bound to affect food security at the end of the day. Briefly.
Former Obama's chief of staff, Rahm Emanuel, liked to say that never let a crisis go to waste, because every crisis provides an opportunity. And I think it's about time for us as a continent, as a country, what opportunities are we going to exploit from this? Yes, it's an unfortunate situation, but now we realize what we cannot rely on. And so I think it's about time we changed the course on how we do things and perhaps become a little bit more self-reliant, whether in terms of increasing our production and manufacture of fertilizer, or dealing with the kind of clients that are actually going to be reliable. Because one thing that was lost, Africa was never considered, and the developing world, in the degree of sanctions that were actually imposed on Russia, because the most vulnerable countries economically are the ones who are going to suffer the most. We don't have safety nets, we don't have bailouts for industries or for families. And so I think it's important we have to look at ourselves a little bit inward and try to develop a degree of self-sufficiency when it comes to agriculture and food production, because what we are facing is an uncertain and complex future.
Right. Hashi, briefly.
I think this is a very, Mr. Dangote is a big fan of Mr. Dangote. Remember, he came here and wanted to open
a cement factory.
Yeah, and some guy over there wanted money.
Kitu kidogo.
We know who that guy was, right?
No, I don't know. Who was it?
I'm in enough trouble already. But
then he went to Tanzania.
So he went to Tanzania because our folks here said, you know, we want 10%. You know, Safaricom comes here, they want 5%. Whoever wants to come here, they want 2%. You know, Debal, you look at Equity, and it's really sad that our chairman today, who's the chairman of Equity, is not here.
Chairman is busy in
yeah, they
Burundi.
made 40 billion profit, so he's definitely busy. There's a lot of money in the account. Of course, of course. I mean, it's important to say that, right? And I believe
it's good for him, of course.
Oh, yes. Yeah. And the CEO of Equity is going to walk away with 500 million shillings in dividends, Debal. I don't know if there's any capital gains tax on that by the government of Kenya. I think that we ought to be very careful about these behemoths here in Kenya, Safaricom, Equity, and all these other big corporates, Debal. There's some antitrust that's coming up. These guys are becoming so big that I don't think there's a market to compete with them. And if I go to Parliament, and they're going to fight me in the constituency now. But I'm probably going to bring legislation of antitrust against these guys.
Balozi, of course, Erastus Mwenche is not here with us as well. So I think there's a big scoop that we will be expecting next week from the dividends. Yeah.
Professor Mencha. I mean, Chairman Mencha should not take anything to do.
Professor Nowe, how you have been
I still need to take another tack. we need to develop this country. And people like Dangote, people like Safaricom, group like Safaricom, our friend Equity, and Hashi, you remember, Barclays Bank and Standard Bank warned people that if you have 20 million in your account, they close it because it's useless. And our friend Mwangi came with really creative ideas. If you have few potatoes, sell them and we'll open an account. So the point, we need creative, innovative leaders in the industry. This is what going to provide the job of the future. Border as it is right now is a threat because it's not organized. But there is a creative way to organize these young people to produce.
Right. All right, Dr. Peter Biara-Jack, we need also to be winding up briefly. Dangote's move.
Well, let me congratulate Dangote. He's really a pride of Africa. What he has been able to do and the way that he's expanding investments, creating jobs and opportunities in many countries on the continent. This is a great move. I wish that he could move to South Sudan at some point. In fact, last year I was selected as a young global leader at the World Economic Forum, and I learned that Dangote sponsors all the fellows from Africa. So at some point, I'm looking forward to meeting him and at some of the forum events in the future.
Thank you. Right, thank you. We are winding up, but Director, just briefly, we have this editorial cartoon as we're winding up today. This is the Daily Nation, Don't Rush Me. This is what Victor has drawn. This is Martha Karua, who has not yet really decided. Is it Kenya Kwanza? Is it Azimio la Umoja? Or is it, of course, Oka? That is where she's really torn in. This is in the Daily Nation. Also, the Standard for you, briefly, as we're winding up, has this for you. And this is what Gado has drawn for us as we're winding up. I'll come up with the one which is coming up because of time. We have the Star. Celeste has drawn this for you. And this is Wanjigi with his $1 billion yacht, as you can see, that is seated there. Of course, the yacht in quads. But it's being given, the lifesaver there with the Safina party. And we know there was that NDC of Safina party. This is in today's Star. Let me try quickly and show you what we have in the People Daily. And this is what you're waking up to on the front page of People Daily. The Standard is here, quickly. And this is what Gado drew today. It's, of course, 1 year for Samia in office. And there's that ominous cloud of the new constitution hanging over her. And she's really terribly coughing. I'll leave it for you to decipher that. This is Samia. We never got to discuss that as well. And lastly, we have a People Daily where Stano has drawn this for us. And we went up the show with this. And this is all about you, the voter. And of course, what they're telling us, World Water Day was yesterday. Mheshimiwa, I like your World Water Day message to your constituents. Water in every home. Is it another campaign prank? Right. Beware of the politicians now who have water bowsers coming to you with free water at the end of the day. We've been watching Global today. Thank you, Dr. Hassan Kanenje, Director, Horn Institute, Professor Nomi Damba, Foreign and Defense Policy Analyst, also Ahmed Hashi, who is a Senior Horn of Africa Analyst, and Dr. Peter Biara-Jack, who is the President of Revive South Sudan. We thank you so much for your valuable contribution. Also, a big up to Ambassador Erastus Mwencha from Burundi, expanding the tentacles of Equity Bank. Next week, we're expecting those shares to be shared here on the show. Thank you very much for your valued company. Morning Prom continues apace. Don't go away. Much more on the other side with, of course, our topic today on youth and politics. Don't go away with Jesse Rogers.
KTN News.